Chapter 38. It took the remainder of the night for Brin and her rescuers to work their way clear of Oldenmoor. They would not have done so even then without Whisper to guide them. But the big moorcat was at home in the bottomland, and neither the mist nor the shapeless, mired earth gave them pause. Choosing their pathway with instincts that the moor could not deceive, he led them south toward the dark wall of the Raven's Horn. "We would have lost you in the moor without Whisper," Kimber explained to the Veil Girl, after they had found her again and begun their march south. "It was Whisper who tracked you through the mist. He is not misled by appearances, and nothing of the moor can fool him. Still, it was fortunate that we reached you when we did, Brin. You must stay close to us after this." Brin accepted the well-intentioned rebuke without comment. There was no point in discussing the matter further. Her decision to leave them before they reached the Malmord was already made. It merely remained for her to find the right opportunity to do so. Her reasons were simple. The task entrusted to her by Eleanor was to penetrate the forest barrier that protected the Eldritch, and to see to it that the Book of Dark Magic was destroyed. She would do this by pitting the magic of the Wishsong against the magic of the Malmord. Once she had wondered if such a thing were even possible. Now she wondered not if such a thing were possible, but if such a thing would prove cataclysmic. The power of the magics unleashed would be awesome. A match not of white magic against dark, as she had once envisioned, but a match of magics equally dark in tone and effect. The Malmord was created to destroy, but the Wishsong too could destroy, and now Brin knew that not only would the potential for such destruction always be there, but that she could not be assured of being able to control it. She might vow to do so, she might swear her strongest oath, but she could never be certain that she could keep that oath. Not anymore, unless she forbore all use of the Wishsong. She could accept the risk to herself. She had done that long ago, when she had decided to come on this quest. But she could not accept the risk to those who travelled with her. She must leave them. Whatever fate she was to suffer when she entered the Malmord, her companions must not be there to share it with her. "You go to your death, Brin of Shannara," the Grimpon had warned. "You carry within you the seeds of that destruction." Perhaps that was so. Perhaps those seeds were carried in the magic of the Wishsong. But one thing was certain. The others of the little company had risked themselves enough for her already. She would not have them do so again. She thought about it all night as she trudged on wearily through the bottomland, remembering what she had felt and the times she had used the Wishsong's magic. The hours slipped past, and the werebeasts did not come to haunt them again that night. But in the mind of the Veil Girl, there were demons of another sort. By dawn, the little company was clear of Oldenmoor, and found itself in the foothills bordering the southern mountains of the Raven's Horn. Wearied from their long march up from Hearthstone, and the events of the night past, and weary of travelling further in daylight when they might easily be seen, the five took refuge in a small copse of pine in a lee between two ridgelines, and fell asleep. They resumed their journey with the return of nightfall, travelling east now, following the high wall of the mountains where it brushed up against the moor. Trailers of mist wound through the trees of the forested lower slopes. A spider's web across the pathway as the travellers passed silently by. The mountain peaks of the Raven's Horn were huge and stark, barren rock lifting out of the forest land to edge sharply against the sky. It was an empty, still night, and the whole of the land about seemed stripped of life. Shadows lay across the cliffs, forests, and the moor's deep mists. In their pooling darkness, nothing moved. They rested at midnight, an uneasy pause where they found themselves listening to the silence as they rubbed aching muscles and tightened bootstraps. It was then that Cogline chose to talk about his magic. "Ah, magic it is too," he whispered cautiously to Brin and Roan, almost as if he feared that someone might be listening. "Magic of a different sort than that wielded by the walkers do, born not of their time, nor the time when elves and fairy folk had the power, but of the time between." He bent forward, eyes sharp and accusing. "Thought I knew nothing of the old world, didn't you, girl?" he asked Brin. "Well, I have the teachings of the old world too, passed down to me by my ancestors. Not druids, no, but teachers, girl, teachers. Theirs was the lore of the world that existed when the great wars caused such destruction to mankind." "Grandfather," Kimberbow cautioned gently, "just explain it to them." Cogline grunted testily. "Explain it," she says. "What is it that you think I do, girl?" His forehead furrowed. "Earth power. That's the magic I wield. Not the magic of words and spells, no, not that magic. Power born of the elements that comprise the ground on which we walk, Outlanders. That is the earth power. Bits and pieces of ores and powders and mixings that can be seen by the eye and felt by the hand. Chemics they were once called, developed by skills of different sort than the simple ones we use now on the four lands. Most of the knowledge was lost for the old world, but a little, just a little, was saved, and it is mine to use." This is what you carry in those pouches?" Roan asked. "This is what you use to make those fires explode?" "Ha ha!" Cogline laughed softly. "They do that, and much more, Southlander. Fires can be exploded, earth turned to mud, air to choking dust, flesh to stone. I have potions for all, and dozens more. Mix and match, a bit of this and a bit of that." He laughed again. "I'll show the walkers power they haven't seen before." Roan shook his head doubtfully. "Spider gnomes are one thing. The Maud wraiths are something else again. A finger points at you, and you are reduced to ash. The sword I carry, infused with the druid magic, is the only protection against those black things." "Bah!" Cogline spat. "You'd best look to me for your protection. You and the girl." Roan began to phrase a sharp retort, then thought better of it and simply shrugged. If we come up against the walkers, we shall both need to offer Brin whatever protection we can." He glanced at the Veil Girl for confirmation, and she smiled agreeably. It cost her nothing to do so. She already knew that neither of them would be with her in any case. She pondered for a time what Cogline had told them. It troubled her that any part of the old skills should have survived the Holocaust of the Great Wars. She did not like to think it possible that such awesome power could come again into the world. It was bad enough that the magic of the world of fairy had been reborn through the misguided efforts of that handful of rebel druids in the councils of Paranor. But to be faced with the prospect that the knowledge of power and energy might again be pursued was even more unsettling. Almost all of the learning that had gone into that knowledge had been lost with the destruction of the old world. What little had survived, the druids had locked away again. Yet here this old man, half crazed and as wild as the wilderness in which he lived, in possession of at least a portion of that learning, a special kind of magic that he had resolved was now his own. She shook her head. Perhaps it was inevitable that all learning, whether born of good or bad intention, whether used to give life or to take life away, must come to light at some point in time. Perhaps it was true both of skill and of magic, one born of the world of men, the other the world of fairy. Perhaps both must surface periodically in the stream of time, then disappear again, then surface once more, and so on, forever. But a return now, the knowledge of energy and power, when the last of the George was gone? Still, Cogline was an old man, and his knowledge was limited. When he died, perhaps the knowledge would die with him, and be lost again, for a time at least. They walked east for the remainder of the night, picking their way through the thinning forestland. Ahead, the wall of the Ravenshorn began to curve back toward them, turning north into the wilderness of the deep Anar. It rose up from out of the night, a towering dark band of shadow. Olden Moor dropped away behind them, and only the thin green line of the foothills separated them from the mountain heights. A deeper silence seemed to settle over the land. It was in the crook of the mountains where they turned north. Brin knew that Graymark and the Malmort lay concealed. And there I must find a way to be free of the others, she thought. There I must go on alone. The first trailers of sunrise began to slip into view beyond the mountain wall. Slowly the skies lightened, turning from deep blue to grey, from grey to silver, and from silver to rose and gold. Shadows fled away into the receding night, and the broad sweep of the land began to etch itself out of the dark. The trees grew visible first, leaves, crooked limbs, and roughened trunks, drawn and coloured by the light. Then rock, shrub, and barren earth, from foothills to bottomland, took form. For a time the shadow of the mountains lingered, a wall against the light. Lost in darkness, not yet faded, but finally that, too, gave way to the sunrise, and the light spilled down over the rim of the peaks to reveal the awesome face of the Ravenshorn. It was a stark and ugly face, a face that had been ravaged by time and the elements and by the poison of the dark magic sown within it. Where the mountains curved north into the wilderness, the rock had been bleached and worn, as if the life in it had been peeled away like skin to leave only bone. It rose up against the skyline, thousands of feet above them, a wall of cliffs and ragged defile, burdened with the weight of the ages gone and horrors endured. On the hard grey emptiness, nothing moved. Brin lifted her face momentarily as the wind brushed past. Her nose wrinkled in distaste. An unpleasant smell rose up from somewhere ahead. Graymark sewers, Cogline spat, ferret eyes darting. We're close now. Kimber slipped ahead of them to where Whisper sniffed tentatively at the odorous morning air. Bending close to the great cat, she spoke softly in his ear. Just a word, and the beast nuzzled her face gently. He turned back to them. Quickly now, before it gets any lighter. Whisper will show us the way in. They hurried forward through the new light and receding shadow, following the moorcat as he guided them along the twists of the foothills to where the Ravenshorn bent north. Trees and shrubs fell away completely. Grasses turned sparse and wintry, and the earth gave way to crushed stone and shelf rock. The smell grew steadily worse, a rank and fetid odour that smothered even the freshness of the new day's birthing. Brin found herself choking for breath. How much worse would it be once they had found their way into the sewers? Then the hills dropped away sharply before them, into a deep valley that was lost in the shadow of the mountain wall. There, sullen and still, lay a dark lake of stagnant water, fed by a stream that seeped down through the rock from a broad blackened hole. Whisper padded to a halt, Kimber at his side. There, she pointed, the sewers. Brin's eyes strayed upward along the ragged line of the peaks, upward thousands of feet to where the mountain wall cut its jagged edge against the golden dawn sky. There, still hidden from view, lay Graymark, the Malmord, and the Eldritch. She swallowed against the smell of the sewers. There, too, lay the fate that was to be hers. Her smile was hard. She must go to meet it. At the entrance to the sewers, Cogline unveiled a bit more of his magic. From a sealed package buried in one of the pouches he wore strapped to his waist, he produced an ointment that, when rubbed into the nostrils, deadened the stench of the sewer's poisonous discharge. A small magic, he claimed. Though the smell could not be obliterated entirely, it nevertheless could be made tolerable. Fashioning short-handled braids from pieces of deadwood, he dipped the ends into the contents of a second pouch, and they emerged covered with a silver substance that glowed like oil lamps when introduced into the cavern's darkness, even in the absence of any fire. "Just a little more of my magic, Outlanders," he chuckled as they stared wonderingly at the flameless torches. "Chemicals, remember? Something the walkers don't know anything about, and have a few more surprises. You'll see." Roan frowned doubtfully and shook his head. Brin said nothing, but decided quickly that she would be just as happy if the opportunity to test those surprises never arose. Torches in hand, the little company moved out of the dawnlight into the tunnel darkness of the sewers. The passageways were wide and deep. The liquid poison discharged from the halls of Graymark and the Malmord, flowing down a worn, rutted tunnel that cut through the tunnel floor. To either side of where the sewage flowed, there were stonewalks that offered footing broad enough for the company to pass upon. Whisper led the way, luminous eyes blinking in sleepy reflection against the light of the torches, splayed feet padding soundlessly on the stone. Cogline followed with Kimber, and Brin and Roan brought up the rear. They walked for a long time. Brin lost track of how long a time it was. Her concentration divided between picking her way through the half-light and thinking of her promise to find a way to go down into the Malmord without the others. The sewer wound upward through the mountain rock, twisting and turning like a coiled snake. The stench fermenting the passage was almost unbearable, even with the aid of the repellent that Cogline had provided to ease their breathing difficulties. From time to time, sudden draughts of cold air blew down from above them, clearing the smell of the sewage. Wind from the peaks into which they climbed, but the draughts of fresh air were few and brief, and the smells of the sewer were always quick to return. The morning slipped away, the hours lost in the endless spiral of their ascent. Once they came upon a massive iron gate that had been dropped across the passageway to prevent anything larger than a rat from entering. Roan reached for the sword, but a sharp word from Cogline brought him up short. A gleeful crackle breaking from his lips. The old man motioned them back, then produced yet another pouch, this one containing an odd blackish powder laced with something that looked to be soot. Dabbing the powder on the bars of the grate where they joined the rock, he touched the treated spots quickly with the flameless torch, and the powder flared a brilliant white. When the light died away, the bars had been eaten completely through. At a stiff nudge, the entire grate collapsed onto the cavern floor. The company went on. No one spoke as they climbed. Instead, they listened for the sound of the enemy that waited somewhere above, the walkers and the things that served them. They heard nothing of these, but there were other sounds that echoed through the empty passageways, sounds that came from far above and were not immediately identifiable. There were clunks and thuds, as if heavy bodies had fallen, scrapes and scratching, a low howling as if a hard wind slipped down through the tunnel. from the mountain peaks, and a hissing, as if steam escaped from some fissure in the earth. These distant sounds filled and thus magnified the otherwise utter silence of the sewers. Brin found herself searching for a pattern to the sound, but there was none, except, perhaps, for the hissing which lifted and fell with a peculiar regularity. It reminded Brin unpleasantly of the Grimm's rise from the lake and the mist. I must find a way to go on alone, she thought one more time. I must do so soon. Tunnels came and went, and the climb wore on. The air within the sewers had grown steadily warmer with the passing of the day, and beneath their cloaks and tunics, the members of the little company were sweating freely. A kind of peculiar mist had begun to filter down through the corridors, clinging and grimy, filled with the sewer's smell. They brushed at it distastefully, but it drifted after them, closed about them, and would not be moved away. It grew thicker as the climb progressed, and soon they were having difficulty seeing further than a dozen feet ahead. Then abruptly the mist and gloom cleared before them, and they stood upon a shelf of rock that overlooked an immense chasm. Down into the mountain's core the chasm dropped, disappearing into utter blackness. The members of the little company glanced uneasily at one another. To their right, the passageway curved upward into the rock, following the trench that carried the sewage from the moored wraith's citadel. To their left, the passageway ran downward a short distance to a slender stone bridge, barely a yard in width, that arched across the chasm to a darkened tunnel that bore into the far cliff face. Which way now? Roan muttered softly, almost as if asking himself. Left, Brin thought at once. Left across the chasm. She did not understand why, yet she knew instinctively that this was the path she must choose. The sewers are the way. Coglan was looking at her. That's what a Grimpon said, wasn't it, girl? Brin found herself unable to speak. Brin, Kimber called to her softly. Yes, she replied finally. Yes, that is the way. She turned right along the shelf, following up along the sewer channel, trudging back again into the blackness. Brin's mind raced. This isn't the way, she thought. Why did I say it was? She took a sudden gulp of air, forcing her thoughts to slow. What she sought was back the way they had come, back across the stone bridge. The mail lord was back that way. She could sense it. Why then had she... She caught herself roughly. The question answered almost as if quickly as it was asked, because this was where she would lead them, of course. This was the opportunity that she had looked for since Olden Moor. This was how it must be. The Wishsong would aid her, a small deceit, a little lie. She sucked in her breath sharply at the thought, even though it would betray their trust in her. She must do it. Softly, gently, she began to hum, building the Wishsong a stone at a time into a wall of non-seeing, creating in her place and in the minds of her companions an image of herself. Then abruptly she stepped away from her own ghost, flattened herself against the stone wall of the passageway, and watched the others walk past. The illusion would only last a few minutes, she knew. She sped back down the sewer tunnel, following the cut and weave of the rock. The sound of her breathing was ragged in her ears. She reached the shelf, hastened to where it narrowed, and turned on to the stone bridge. The chasm yawned blackly before her. A step at a time she inched out onto the bridge, picking her pathway across. There was silence in the gloom and the mist that swirled about her, yet she felt somehow that she was not alone. Her mind hardened against the bridge, the brief surge of fear and doubt, and she withdrew deep into herself, passionless and cold. Nothing could be allowed to touch her. At last she was across the bridge. She stood within the entrance of this new tunnel for a moment and let the feeling return. A brief thought of Roan and the others passed through her mind and disappeared. She had used the Wishsong against them now as well, she thought bitterly. And though it might have been necessary, it hurt her deeply to have done so. Then she wheeled abruptly toward the stone bridge, pitched the Wishsong to a quick, hard shriek and sang. The sound echoed in fury through the black, and the bridge exploded into fragments and dropped away into the chasm. Now, there could be no going back. She turned into the tunnel and disappeared. The sound of the shriek penetrated up into the sewer tunnel, where the others of the little company still picked their way through the gloom. Shades! What was that? Roan cried. There was a moment's silence as the echo died away. Brin! It was Brin, Kimber whispered in reply. Roan stared. No, Brin was right next to him. Abruptly, the image of the Valgur had created in their minds faded into nothingness. Cogline swore softly and stamped his foot. What has she done? The Highlander stammered in confusion, unable to finish the thought. Kimber was at his side, her face intense. She has done what she has wanted to do from the beginning, I think. She has left us and gone on alone. She said before that she did not want any of us to go with her. Now she has made certain that we do not. For cat's sake, Rome was appalled. Doesn't she understand how dangerous? She understands everything, the girl cut him short, pushing past him down the tunnel's passage. I should have realized before that she would do this. We must hurry if we are to catch up with her. Whisper, track. The big moorcat leaped ahead effortlessly, gliding back down the sewer tunnel into the shadows. The three humans hurried after, slipping and stumbling through the mist and gloom. Roan Lee was angry and frightened at the same time. Why would Brin do this? He did not understand. Then abruptly they were back upon the stone shelf, staring out across the chasm to where the bridge fell away into the dark, broken at its centre. There. You see, she used the magic. Wordlessly, Roan hurried forward, stepping out onto the jagged remnant of the bridge. 20 feet away, the other end jutted from the cliff face. He could make that jump, he thought, suddenly. It was a long way over, but he could make it. At least he must try. No, Roan Lee. Kimber pulled him back from the precipice, reading at once his intentions. Her grip on his arm was surprisingly strong. You must not be foolish. You cannot jump so far. I can't leave her again, he insisted stubbornly. Not again. The girl nodded solemnly. I care for her too, she turned. Whisper. The moorcat padded up to her, whiskered face rubbing her own. Softly she spoke to the cat, stroking him behind his ears. Then she stepped away. Track, Whisper, she commanded. Wheeling, the moorcat darted onto the bridge, gathered himself and sprang into the air. He cleared the chasm effortlessly, landed on the far end of the shattered bridge, and disappeared into the darkened tunnel beyond. There was concern reflected in Kimber Beaujean's face. She had not wanted to separate herself from the cat, but Brin might have greater need of him than she, and the Veil Girl was her friend. Guard well, she whispered after. Then she looked back again at Roan. Now, let us also try to find a way to reach Brin Omsford.